She asked if we knew what the FDA stands for. Before we could reply, she said, "Formula doesn't arrive." Formula doesn't arrive. FDA. My friends, the FDA failed to do its job, plain and simple. What happened to the other submissions? Did you expedite the review of the new formula submissions when you took the helm at the FDA amidst a growing shortage? By law, the FDA has 90 days to review new infant formula manufacturing submissions. What's the average number of days it actually takes for the FDA to review these?
Senator Burr, FDA employees are working around the clock, and they are hardworking people, so I somewhat resent the implication of part of that. But
Dr. Califf, there's no member that's defended the FDA more than this one, and there's no member in Congress that has tried to fix areas when they are broken than this one. If you want to get into this with me, I'm happy to do it. I got 28 years worth of it.
I know you're quite capable of that. So let me just say, right from the start, any good application was expedited by the FDA since the shortage became evident.
So 42 minus 15, the rest of them were not good applications?
I think you were referring to 2019 or something you said?
No, it was FY21.
Yeah, I'll have to get back on the details on that.
Listen, the FDA has imperiled the health and safety of American families. You've created shortage and crisis. You've created panic and fear. Yesterday, in testimony to the House, you tried to shift the blame. The mailroom didn't deliver a whistleblower complaint. It's your mailroom. And FDA knew there was a problem even before the whistleblower sent the letter, strike one. Yesterday, you said you were new, but the president hired you and the Senate confirmed you because you'd been there before. And your center director has been there for almost a decade, strike two. Yesterday, you said the FDA could have done a better job. That's painfully obvious, but where's the accountability? Maybe that's strike three. By the time Abbott resumes production, after finally getting approval from your agency, which it still doesn't have, it'll take 2 months for their production to go back to capacity. That will be a success for the private sector. The Abbott CEO apologized for their mistakes. I wonder if the FDA will apologize for their mistakes. The FDA Food Center, let's talk about it. It has a staff of 4,000 people, but according to your own budget documents, there are only 9 staff reviewing infant formula applications. Did you or other FDA leaders assign any staff to review infant formula as the shortage percentages rose sharply?
We pulled in people from all over the agency to help that short-staffed group, which of course—
To process applications.
I'll have to go back and see exactly how they spent their time, but looking at all of the activities of that group, they were supplemented by staff from across the agency, which of course means that other things didn't get done.
Do you have the authority as commissioner to move people around as needed?
Yes.
Okay. I've looked at an initial review of some of the activities of the Food Center, and I'm concerned with your prioritization of the activities with the staff you have. Since the voluntary recall, for infant formula, FDA Food Center spent time making changes to the definition of yogurt, opining on color additives in the Antarctic krill meat, that's fish food, so farms can raise salmon that looks more pink, making announcements about the use of the term of the definition healthy. Since the first infant hospitalization, the same center has issued a rule on the definition of French dressing and issued guidance on cheese and chocolates that stray from the FDA's official definition. This is a pattern over the last decade. The same center has gone after salt, sprinkles, and even the definition of frozen cherry pie. So my question is simple in conclusion. What are your priorities at the Food Center?
The Food Center has a broad set of mandates, as you well know, but there's nothing higher priority than this particular issue that we're discussing today. It is the highest priority. We're assigning every resource that we can to work on this problem.
Well, I hope that the chair's request did not fall on deaf ears, that a detailed, comprehensive plan should be something that you could produce now if, in fact, the agency's working at the expedited pace that you addressed. If it's not ready today, I hope it's in the very, very near future. This month, CDC closed its investigation into the infection of 4 children, finding no direct link to the manufacturer's facility, but the FDA only just now began to use tools to increase the supply of formula. And FDA still hasn't authorized the Abbott lab to resume manufacturing, even though CDC determined the original contamination did not come from Abbott's Sturgis plant. The question I could not answer for my constituent is what took FDA so long? Why wasn't action taken when the warning signs of this crisis started last fall. FDA is slipping back into its bureaucratic bad old ways. The FDA gets $6 billion from Congress each year, over 18,000 staff, yet you failed to prioritize the things that matter. For the past 2 years, the Food Center ignored formula crisis until it became a political liability. Instead, the center focused on reducing salt in food, what kinds of salad dressing we can call French dressing, and the ingredients that can be used in yogurt. You had time to decide what color additives can be added to make farm salmon look more pink and work on consumer acceptance of grated Parmesan cheese. Infants, babies, and toddlers are starving, and parents are facing the reality that they can't feed their children in the United States of America. And your food center is more interested in policy marketing claims about cheese than ensuring American families have formula to feed their babies. When you finally took steps, the formula shortage had reached an alarming 43%. It's time that we hold the FDA accountable. When she called my office to demand accountability from her government, she was confused that the White House seemed to be blaming the formula manufacturer. Abbott began flying formula to the United States from overseas in February. 11 million pounds since February, 50 flights a week, 6 to 8 flights a day, 132,000 cans to 12 different airports across the country. There's something we haven't heard. Abbott knew there was a shortage problem, but FDA seemed not to. Abbott's been very transparent about what problems they faced and what they're doing to fix the problems. Their CEO even published an op-ed apologizing for their part in this crisis. My friends, the FDA failed to do its job, plain and simple. This isn't a story about funding. Congress provides over $1 billion for the Food Center alone every year. This Congress even gave them an additional $700 million in COVID money. $436 million of it is still available. The House passed a bill to give an additional $28 million to the FDA. Ladies and gentlemen, that's called political cover. This money's a stunt, so people could go home and say they did something. That's dishonest at best and blatantly irresponsible at worst. The American people know better whose fault it is here. This isn't a story about authority. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act authorities are clear. The flexibility you have is real. A sad story about FDA's unwillingness and inability to do their job.
The FDA, what has the White House done to correct this problem? We're kind of bragging about a shipment of, I think, of 78 million, was it pounds or pounds of formula. Just to put some numbers to that, that's probably enough formula to feed the babies in Kansas for 3 or 4 days, and a fraction of what has been shipped in here. How much of the problem could have been solved if people weren't working from home in the FDA, if they would have been willing to go examine what was going on at the laboratory in Michigan, or they could have possibly went over to Europe and certified some of the manufacturing plants in Europe that Abbott has. The follow-up question, is the FDA still working from home, or are people engaged now?
It's also the case in most of the jobs at FDA, people are working 100% of the time or more. And I'll just remind you that I come from, in my last job, one of the most successful companies on the face of the earth, where people were working from home and more productive than ever. So I really don't agree with the contention that the work from home policies at FDA had anything to do with the outcome here. But I'm also not saying the outcome was a good outcome. I don't want to be misinterpreted that way. We just have a disagreement. And I think the right solution going forward is going to be a hybrid arrangement, as I said, as most of the industry is going to, which is if you have a job like in a lab that requires that you be there, or in the mailroom, you got to be there. If you're reviewing documents or reviewing processes, you can do that from home. Just demonstrate that you're doing the work.
You mentioned how the inspectors are commonly in the field, but we know that HHS stayed shut down for far longer than the private sector. We had a problem a summer ago. How many inspectors were actually not in the field working? How many were Zooming their inspections as opposed, what percent of the workers, whatever, as opposed to actually showing up for work?
As you know, we have very limited authority to do inspections virtually. We actually need to have that as part of inspections, but the inspections were hands-on in the plant
And so
inspections.
what
They were just
percent of your
fewer them.
inspectors were actually working as opposed to not being at work? Because HHS had a huge problem of people not showing up for work for 2 years.
I think from every piece of data I've seen, we have a very high rate of work. And I might also mention, you know, I was at a pretty highly functioning business called Alphabet, which has done pretty well, where when you have the
I
kind
have
of work
limited
that
time, I
reviewers
accept
do-
that, but inspecting on site is different than what
Yes.
Alphabet does.
I agree.
And I don't mean to be rude.
Abbott submitted its paperwork for reopening the Sturgis facility to the FDA on April the 8th. 7 weeks later, the facility is still closed. Do you have permanent inspectors every day in the Sturgis facility helping Abbott identify the contaminations that the inspectors found?
You have some incorrect information. Abbott did not submit adequate documentation on the date that you referred. That was only
Do you have
done on the
inspectors?
last
Do
day.
you have inspectors today in the facility every day helping Abbott get the plant up and running?
We have inspectors working with Abbott every day as
Not
they're
in the
working
plant.
on it.
Not
No,
in the
not in the
plant.
plant, no.
Okay.